Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a much needed and a long break from cult musicals. And we're all together again on the new moon to talk about spiritual themes within cult musicals. And we have, of course, our favorite returning co host and a very special guest. So I will digress and let our special guest host introduce himself and what he does. And then we'll go around and you can introduce yourselves, everyone. So, Andy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is really exciting. I teach a whole class on cult movies, so this is something that I expect I'm going to give to my students to listen to as part of the course. But I'm a film professor at CU Denver, and I teach courses on genre and audiences and the emotional experience of going to the movies. And I've written a book about evil children in the horror genre as a trope. But then since COVID, I've been doing these movie events that are kind of like Rocky Horror, but with other movies. So we did Sister Act as like a church ceremony. We did Death Becomes Her with a dead celebrity ball. And so it's something that started in my backyard. And 2 years later, we just got named like one of the best events in Denver. So things are good with Little Rainbow Cult. So that's me.
Andy, by the way,
Yeah.
before we move on to my other fabulous friends, could you please tell me about
Mhm.
the prayer candles that you have made for you? For instance, you have a best little whorehouse prayer candle,
Whoa.
elaborate
Yes.
prayer candle.
Yeah, so behind me are all of our designs, and they're like my Catholic trauma filtered through cult movies. And so let me grab candles. Um, yeah, so I started doing these to like advertise the films in a unique way. And so I have the Virgin of
Huh.
Guadalupe there. I have two Dorothys. One kind of a brand new day Dorothy, and she's kind of like inspired by the Sun card and tarot. And then Dorothy from the original Wizard of Oz, kind of inspired by the Fool card from tarot. And they're all done in like a stained glass style. This is our most popular one. Rocky Horror as like Ascension of Christ. Called it Gay Rapture is what I wanted for the artist to do, which is the kind of the plot of Rocky Horror, right? And then I have other ones like the Golden Girls as the last airbender, last AARP bender, I like to say.
And what about
So
your
that,
labyrinth and the best little whorehouse ones? What do they recommend?
yeah.
Where do they represent?
Let's see. So Labyrinth, you can see
Oh, their sister act.
there's Whoopi, inspired by the Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro, and then Dolly in the little chicken ranch, is our kind of Empress inspired card. What else I got? Um, the Virgin Mary, oh, Elvira, inspired by Saint Sebastian, and Mrs. White from Clue.
So you're just basically speaking our language, and you have a Tu Wong Fu unicorn shirt on as well,
I
which
do, yeah. I also had a design for Tu Wong Fu that was like inspired by crossing the Potomac. And so if I can find that, I'll pull that out too. So yeah.
so we haven't been together in a long time. I feel like this is a church service. Darren, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you for people who may not know you yet?
My name is Darren J. Fleming. I'm an actor, writer, comedian. For years, I lived in New York City and worked as a drag performer named Miss Grenadine Ross. Now I live in the Midwest. I'm still an actor and a producer, and I'm happy to be here. I am a big Wizard of Oz fan. Like, that's my all-time favorite story in the world, next to Snow White. But anyway, the Wizard of Oz, I would say, is like the Bible, and then Wicked
Mm,
is the New Testament.
yes, I love that.
Yes.
Mm,
So I'm very excited to see what we get
oh,
to talk about today because at first I was like,
fun.
spirituality in musicals, huh? I don't get it. And then I was like,
Mm,
oh, and then I saw one of your slides for the class for your class where they talk about its
mm,
rituals and people to dress up and all that.
mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, because Wicked already they're doing that. They haven't even released the second part of the movie yet, and already they had to
Totally.
create a sing along because people were spontaneously combusting into song in the middle of the
Yep,
theater.
yep.
So I'm
This is
excited.
what Yeah, this is why people are talking about like an experience economy because we're no longer watching the same thing at the same time anymore. So like finding a space where it's a collective experience, like that's what
Right.
people are craving. Um, we just did a Wizard of Oz event at Meow Wolf here in Denver, and we invited people to cosplay, had drag performers doing numbers from Wicked as the Oz character. We could talk about Wizard of Oz a lot. I also teach a whole class on Wizard of Oz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we could do a whole episode on that, so I'm not sure.
We
Well,
need to
I
talk.
think we're all
Yes, we
wondering
do.
is like, why weren't you teaching us when we went to college? Like, where were
Uh,
you?
I'm trying to be the instructor I wish I had, you know what I mean? And so like I've stopped doing term papers for my students. I've have for my cult movies class, their final is they have to create an immersive experience around a film that they love. And so like what would that do? Like what would the advertising look like? What props would you have? You know. So what's the
And Darren
venue?
loves all, and then we'll move on to Amber and then Polly.
Mm,
Darren loves all Oz adaptations and incarnations. So I think they're like our
mm.
Oz, our what would you an Ozorian? Oz Orville?
Ozzy.
Ozorian. I love
Ozzy.
that. Um,
I'll take
actually,
it.
this is a whole interview I did about Wizard of Oz for a local newspaper when we did our Wizard of Oz event. And this is our ad. It was like the Wizard of Oz and Kiss makeup.
Oh my God.
I'll send you some
Sure.
swag. No, we'll talk
Nice.
later.
Amber?
So I'm Amber. I'm a designer for the theme parks here in Orlando, specifically
Mm,
Universal Studios. Basically, I transitioned my childhood love of going into fantasy lands into a paycheck. So that's
cool.
what I do. I'm also a big Wizard of Oz fan as well, and I do a lot of like reflecting on the things that I love and why I love them. And it's like Wizard of Oz, the girl goes into another land. It's Alice in
Mm-hmm.
Wonderland goes into another land.
Totally.
Labyrinth goes into another land. Chi Chi
Mm,
Bayman, they go into another land. So I think that has driven a lot of my life. Myself like
mm.
reflect on all that.
So cool.
And
Yeah.
Polly, who is our resident Rocky Horror stan and aficionado.
What makes you say that?
You are, oh, I get it. Blonde.
Yeah. No, I'm a close to 20 years as part of this little cult, as they say. But yeah, like I work in media. I work primarily as a film and TV editor. I've dabbled in some restoration work. I was a trauma film intern reject on top of that.
Hmm.
But I actually started a Rocky Horror Shadowcast troupe in New Jersey with my wife a few years ago. We've been going now for about 4 years now. It has been part of my life for almost half of it.
Hmm.
And but besides that though, like I've always loved cult film just in general, not just musicals, but just cult film in general. So this should be interesting. I have like a lot of like conflicting thoughts on the whole Rocky Horror cult film phenomenon, but also just some other films that have touched me in ways that I never thought would. So, yeah.
I think as, I'm also a teacher, Andy. I think, I always tell
Mm-hmm.
students that stories and music and books and films, which you can agree or disagree, have a way to impact us in a way that a lot of people don't give recognition to. I mean, a movie can not
Mm-hmm.
only change your perception of other films, but it also can change your life, which is
Mm,
still something that a lot of critics, I think, fail to see is that movies, regardless if a movie is or a musical that we love is well received or not, it has
mm,
the power to sort of change your path. It could be one line that a
mm,
character says in dialogue that can completely change the trajectory of your life. And
mm,
I think that's why a lot of us appreciate movies and musicals that were underrepresented because they represent the
mm,
underrepresented.
mm-hmm. Yeah, cool movies often do.
So, Andy, when we get into the nitty gritty of it all,
Mm,
I wanted to ask you before we get into our own perceptions of things. Could you tell us a little bit about your teaching and your research about how you think cult musicals sort of are synonymous and reflect religion and spirituality?
yeah, and if we think about some of the ways in which cult movies operate, we're all in a shared space where expressing our devotion towards this thing. It's like literally a projection, right? That we're all sharing in an affect. There is, when it comes to cult movies specifically, there is a sort of call and response that is very church-like. And I think that there are other ways we can think about, like the dressing up for the event has certain similarities. And there is, if we think about the way in which we exchange movie lines as a sort of linguistic or semiotic, it has a Bible of sorts, right? And quotation of the text is an important part of cult fandom, something that we all kind of share, a shared language. And so in a lot of those ways, it does feel like a sort of secular church experience.
But also a lot of the movie, it's kind of interesting how like Wicked is brand new in terms, it's not brand new in terms of the public consciousness.
Right.
But for instance, Darren is dressed and is enamored with Wicked. Wicked has
Mhm.
started to become this cult thing that's also
Mm.
mainstream.
Sure.
And do you
And
think
financially successful,
yes, which is
right?
cult, that's the whole, I guess, the argument is can cult movies be
Yeah,
financially successful? I mean, Twilight was
right.
extremely
Mm,
successful, but it's a very niche cult thing.
mm,
Do you think, for instance, new movies such as Wicked are reflective of, well, you'll probably say yes, not only the need and the need and desire for what is needed in that particular period, but
mm,
also that why do you think the reason that, for instance, like a new movie like Wicked, not only
yeah.
can be financially successful, but has already caught on to this cult thing of community
Hmm.
and communion and
Hmm.
sort of a form of escapism? Is there anything in
Yeah.
particular you think?
If we go back, I mean, like the movie sure is a sort of blockbuster success. I think the musical Wicked started as something small and found its niche audience, which then would accelerate its growth. Certainly, the novel by Gregory Maguire wasn't a widely read text, and so I think that we're seeing probably the success of being able to um, find niche audiences easily and to capitalize on them is what I think it is that it's still kind of a cult text. It's just one that has like found its cult audience quite quickly. Darren,
And
you're nodding your head too. I know you have stuff to say about this. Oh, go ahead,
Well,
Nick.
I agree. Right. So the movie is very new, but the musical has been around for the last
Mhm.
21 years. And when
Right.
it first came out, I saw it opening night on Broadway, and the reviews were mixed. I, of course, was weak
Mm.
aisles, but the person
Hmm.
I saw it with, he said it was a piece of trash, and the reviews were mixed. And so people, we really didn't know whether or not it was a hit or not until
Mm.
the Tonys, et cetera, et cetera. But I think all
Mm.
the things that people caught on to was that it's the Wizard of Oz. There's that nostalgia thing. So it's like, okay, here
Hmm.
we all know. And then we're getting told, like, we're being told this isn't the real story. This is the story
Mm.
we need to know. And I think that that's
Yeah.
also something like, oh, wait a minute, the Wicked Witch, she was green. She wasn't wicked. She was an underdog.
Mhm.
Wait a minute, she was an activist. Hold on a second. And so I think that that also is what is making people come to the theaters, because people are going,
Mm.
wait a minute, I don't want to come and see a bunch of people singing, but wait a minute, wait, they're talking about something? And wait, this is Oz? So it's a whole immersive experience that people are
Mm.
coming away with and just like can't get over it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's something interesting to think about, like as cult musicals, the trend of movies that aren't musicals but that get made into Broadway musicals. And here's kind of the inverse, right? Is that this like popular Broadway musical then gets made into a kind of preordained cult movie. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any opinions before we move into what I asked my co-host to think about? Do you have any opinions of why, or it's probably something that you could write a dissertation on, but why certain movies or musicals find
Mm.
audiences, why audiences resurrect or safeguard or keep certain movies and build a like a devotion or religion around them? Do you have any
Hmm.
sort of explanation or
There's so many reasons that cult fandom kind of crops up. When I teach this course, I start with the kind of so bad it's good cult movie. So like a love for Reefer Madness or even Showgirls, right? And Like, right, just Showgirls for sure. That's a film I love to teach. And so we have that, but then we have the kind of like misunderstood film that like Death Becomes Her. It is a film that gets sort of like we're going to rescue this film because the public didn't get it. A modern one would be like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, as this like really rabid cult fandom, and it failed initially, but probably because it was ahead of its time, you know. Does that, yeah, I can't remember the original question, but maybe
Oh, why do
that's
you
what's
think
up.
that certain movies are
Oh,
resurrected and safeguarded and find niche cult audiences? But I think, I
yeah.
mean, I know gay gods forgive me, I haven't seen the Wicked film yet.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I do believe, Oz represents something eternal, something queer. But
Yeah.
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
this particular film came out at a very particular time in
Hmm.
American
Hmm.
consciousness to
Yes.
Mm.
where an age-old story seems new and seems modern and
Mm.
seems relevant,
Oh
as
my gosh.
almost as if it predicted what was needed at the time. I mean, it came out at a time where a lot of Americans and the world is exhausted, is scared,
Mm.
is
Yeah.
confused, is othered. So I think it's quite interesting how it was
Yeah.
on the pulse of something way before
Totally.
something happened. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, it's a text about how do you respond to fascism. You
Mhm.
know, it is about the immigrant joining forces with the steel worker and the farmer and going to Washington, D.C. and demanding things of a representative democracy and unmasking a propagandist.
Well,
People for
Well, there it
people
is.
for yeah. Well, I mean that's what this whole interview is about. You know what I mean? About why it's back again is because it's a blueprint for how to respond to Trump, um, which is really kind of fascinating. And I can't wait to see the next chapter in Wicked to see how much they draw in. When I did the Wizard of Oz event at Meow Wolf here, I dressed up as Donald Trump with a top hat that said "Make Oz Great Again." Because that's what it is. I mean, he goes and he's talking about basically the transcontinental highway system is what he's building, which displaced all all these poor people. And so, yeah, there's the allegory is there. And
I
I
also
just
think
can't
there is a
wait.
niche audience for a lot of the musicals that I love, and a lot of musicals we love predicted the world that we lived in, like Shock
Yeah,
Treatment and
totally.
other musicals. It's
Yeah.
because I guess certain movies and certain musicals that we love, and we'll digress. They predict things and they're not understood because it hasn't happened yet. But I think the
Yeah.
interesting thing about Wicked is that it came out at the perfect time,
Hmm.
almost the perfect time, and maybe it was meant to come out. Maybe there's something cosmic about it.
Just like The Wiz came out at the right time, right? A Black Power musical, like it couldn't have happened at any other time. And so, and I love that The Wiz is kind of like this fantasy of like I won't look past my own backyard is bullshit. And like with this, and so like the need to leave home becomes the theme of The Wiz, which is really kind of remarkable,
So I
right? Because
asked, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, it's fine. I love talking about The Wiz too, but
Oh,
yeah,
I
sorry.
love The Wiz. I actually, and I have a special place in my heart for The Wiz. I don't want to mention it yet, but actually
Mhm.
I grew up loving The Wiz more than any Oz adaptation. I
Mm,
love The Wiz so
yeah.
much, probably because of my affinity for Michael Jackson and just
Mm,
everything. So I love The
mhm,
Wiz. I will defend The
mhm,
Wiz, it was critically reviled when it came out, but audiences didn't care, which I loved about.
mhm. Yeah. It's become, we call it like a heritage film, right? It's become a film that is so intrinsic to like Black identity, right? And it's the one that you share with family members. And so, yeah, the fandom of The Wiz is also really, really cool to research.
And it's finally getting its just dues with the Criterion Blu-ray,
Yeah.
which I'm really
And
excited about.
they're redoing a tour of it. I mean, I think its response to a fascist leader is really, really fascinating and relevant.
So what the curveball that I threw my co-host is I asked them to think about two questions. The first question was a cult musical or a musical that they find spiritual themes in that I think are really
Mm,
prevalent, or maybe a cult musical that the majority of the consensus might not see a spiritual theme in. And that's the
Mm.
first question. So not, and the second question is a cult musical that had spiritual significance and impact on you. So there's two different sort of questions. So the first question I asked them was to think of a cult musical that they see a very strong, resounding spiritual theme, regardless if they like that musical or not. So for instance, The Apple, Jesus Christ Superstar, etc. So anybody can go in any order. Is there any cult musical that you can think of where the spiritual theme is either really prevalent or you have to dig deep to find some deep spiritual meaning?
Mm.
And that's open for everyone.
So
I feel like we're in mass. Go
I'll
ahead.
go. So mine's not really a movie. I mean, it's a movie, but they adapted it into a stage production. It's the Finding Neverland.
Mm.
You're familiar with the stage adaptation, but it's all about death and like where you go and not to be afraid of it. And that we've reinvented the idea of heaven isn't actually what you think it is, that it can be anything that you think it is.
Mm.
So, but if you look at the original text for Peter Pan, there's a lot of like spirituality in that, you know, like where do you go?
Mm.
Is there any particular reason that you chose that, Amber? I know Peter Pan's quite an important part of your ethos and your
It's
life.
really the end of that wherein the mother actually like when she dies and she descends into what you think is heaven, but it's really Neverland. Like her kids created this image of this entire like beautiful world with J.M. Barrie, and at the end, instead of showing the audience that she's like dead, Peter Pan comes and like takes her away to Neverland. And it's just a
Mm.
really beautiful moment.
What do you think about that particular? Are you familiar with that, Andy?
With Finding Neverland, yeah, my Finding Neverland story is that I watched the movie on a plane in like the middle seat of five, and I just started like sobbing. It's like during this, and it's like it's my nightmare to like have that experience on a plane, you know, where I'm watching the wrong thing. And but yeah, it's a really emotional text. And I think too that the story of Peter Pan is so like foundational. It's for the stories that we tell about like childhood and what we lose. Yeah.
To quote Michael
Yeah.
Jackson, have you seen my childhood?
Right.
Have you had the
Right.
opportunity to ever see the stage adaptation?
I
Because if you cry
haven't.
during the movie, oh my gosh,
I probably will be a mess. Yeah,
look
absolutely.
it up. There is
Yeah.
a clip of the end of that, and literally Peter Pan
Mm,
comes to the window and takes her away. And what happens is he comes to the window, grabs her hand, and all of a sudden the stage goes dark, and it's just her
mm,
nightgown, and it's just
mm,
swirling in this wind tunnel,
mm,
and with all this glitter, and it's
mm,
oh my God, it
mm.
tears me up every time.
Love it. Love
And
that.
Yeah,
Andy, before we move on to, sorry, Polly or Darren, or if Amber has anything else to say, do you see the same type of ceremony and religiosity in theater as in movie
Mm,
theaters in terms of
mm-hmm,
sort of audiences going to the same musical every night and it builds up its
mm-hmm.
sort? Do you think that a stage musical can have the same religious and spiritual impact as a movie musical?
I would have to say yes, right? That it's about the kind of like energy of a crowd. And look, I mean, we know on an empirical level that prayer works, right? Because it's just energy and intention. But that can be projecting your love of a film or the collective like release of energy in a horror film. I mean, these are all very powerful things.
Amber, do you have any other important anecdotes or important things that you want to share about why you chose Finding Neverland?
um, no, it's just like I said before, I really lean into the things where people go into other imaginative lands, and so that was one that really has touched me and has actually come back into my life where I listen to the soundtrack. I feel like you find different movies and soundtracks, particularly, they come to your life for a reason, and every so often, like they regurgitate themselves into your life. So I feel like that one has recently come back in where it's like I need to listen to this.
Mm.
Ugh. Um, Holly and Darren, thinking about not the musical that you or the cult musical that you love that has a spiritual impact on you, but a cult musical that has a spiritual theme that you think is very obvious or one that is not obvious that people should reevaluate.
I'll go. So obviously my background, it's Tommy, which is also celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. So I'll just be honest here. I am not a spiritual person. I would more or less say an atheist. I do not believe in anything beyond rationality in terms of just what we are, who we are, where we're living. I do believe in a type of spirituality which is more or less like human decency and our ability to overcome the challenges for positive. So for Tommy, I chose it because it was one of the first like pieces of media when I was like 12 years old. I was raised Catholic. I was in Catholic school. And I'm pretty sure I saw this on cable. It was, I think, maybe like IFC. And they don't edit the film, which is amazing because, pretty much any, channel back in the day, you'd be very hard to find something that was not edited for TV. And I'm pretty sure that this was shown on maybe like an Easter weekend. So right there, like you had some strange counter programming to, what is supposed to be like the highest holy days of the Catholic Church. And this film kind of like, I guess maybe started the bug in me in terms of like what my views on organized religion were. Like even as a child, like I really never bought into the creation myths and things like that. I was into Star Trek and I was into science and I was into all these sorts of things that, are I guess more in terms of just like rational humanism versus, the belief in the supernatural. So seeing this film, and knowing it's The Who, which, I knew of, but hearing the music and seeing, these actors do it was something else. And the essential message of it basically being that like, you can find enlightenment, but you can't necessarily push it onto the people. Otherwise, it's going to be commoditized and turned into a version of what that enlightenment is. And literally, end of the film, Tommy has lost everything, yet still has his enlightenment. And to me, that resonated, even at like an early age, that we're all on our own personal journeys of self-discovery. And at the confines of like doctrine or dogma, to me, they destroy the human experience. To me, it's putting people in a box and selling it as though it's your salvation. I mean, the scene behind me right here, it's the perfect distillation of just like American capitalism, our fascination with celebrity, and transposing that with religion. And for a 12-year-old to see this and to get it, like it just blew my mind in terms of just what art can really show. And the fact that it's Marilyn Monroe and that their ceremony is, instead of like the Eucharist, it's barbiturates and whiskey, this amazing distillation of just what is the difference between religion and spirituality. And as I said before, like I am not somebody that believes in the supernatural, but I do believe in some tenets of many different religions, which all boil down to just do unto others as you do unto yourself. Be a good human being. And if you have enlightenment, more power to you. But don't try to force it upon other people. They have to discover these things on their own. So I think, with the 50th anniversary of, not only Tommy, but also Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I can't wait to talk about, is important. And it should be, reevaluated and re-seen and the music slaps. I mean, it's so fucking hoop. Like they're incredible. And Roger Daltrey is like at his absolute peak in this. I mean, he's climbing mountains and he's swimming in oceans, and um, it's an incredible rock opera.
I know the point of what they were trying to make with the Marilyn Monroe. She gives eyesight to the blind, and I know it's like a critique on American capitalism and things. But I think it's so glamorous to have a Monroe Eucharist. I just loved it. I thought it was so fabulous because it wasn't too far from when Marilyn had passed. What, 10 years?
It's
Less than
about
10
about like
years?
15, probably 15. But again, she's an American icon, and this is
Mhm.
being done by British filmmakers who are seeing a completely different type of worship of the
Mm.
American idiom. Like
Mm.
the English don't have celebrities, the English have aristocracy. We
Mm.
created our own aristocracy in our country with our celebrities.
Very true.
Mm.
Before we move on to Darren, do you have any thoughts about Tommy, Andy?
Gosh, just that I love it. You're right, the music slaps. Was it the first concept album that was made into a movie musical?
I
Do you
think
know?
Jesus Christ Superstar might have
That
been the
was
first.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because Jesus Christ Superstar was a concept album before it was even a stage musical.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Tommy the album was made, I think, in like 68, 69. This was 75. So some time
Okay.
had passed. And in fact,
Hmm.
like the movie does have like a different arrangement than the album. In fact, I think like there's even like a song or two that are
Hmm.
not from the original album that were made specifically for the film.
Yeah.
And of course, you have Tina Turner as the Acid Queen, which
Oh
is
my
the best.
Which I love.
R.I.P.
Yeah.
Incredible
But
act.
Andy, before we move on to Darren and their choice for a film that has significant themes of spirituality, do you have any further thoughts or questions or any
Well, I
observations
mean,
about Tommy?
Tommy's kind of an interesting thing because a lot of time in genre study we talk about how rock and roll kind of killed the musical, in a certain way that like with rock and roll and filmed concerts, we kind of lost the conceit of people just breaking into song spontaneously, and so. The rock and roll musical though is typically like the backstage musical plot, like it's a performance musical. But then we also had with films like The Graduate, where the soundtrack started to emote for the characters, and so we don't need them to break out into song anymore. And so it's interesting, Paul, because like Who's Tommy is a bit of a throwback that way. You know what I mean? It is. It's yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, for me, absolutely. Well, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the way that it feels too, it's almost like like a string of music videos as opposed to like
Hmm.
a, a
Yeah.
I suppose a more traditional narrative.
You're right. Yeah.
Section of its film is a music video,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
carries the through line of the rock opera.
Mm,
You are going through the story, something
hmm.
similar, but also very different to me. That I could compare Tommy at least to is also The Wall.
Hmm.
In terms of just like the way that it's structured. I mean, there's a little bit more
Yeah. Thinking
of that.
about like Across the Universe, that
Yeah, yeah,
the
where
Beatles musical
yeah.
is structured like a series of music videos with kind of
Mhm.
narrow through line, really.
I think Amber really loves Across the Universe, if I remember correctly.
That was my second pick for today.
Okay, we're gonna say anything then. We
Oh,
digress. Darren, what is a cult musical or musical that you think has a very prevalent spiritual theme that's either overt or subversive, like obvious or non-obvious?
Wicked. The one I
mm,
chose. It. Some people say, "Oh, it's just the Wizard of Oz," but it actually does because it's got the whole "Why does evil exist?" But then
mm,
also, Elphaba's story parallels Lucifer, a misunderstood figure that is punished for asking questions. So
mm,
think about that, and then what is the wizard's regime? That's the real corruption. And we can hear
mhm,
Trump and all of the other things. Uh,
mhm,
that's really a spiritual thing. And then the song Defying Gravity is a
mm,
declaration of self liberation. And some people have attributed that to coming out of the closet. I was
mm,
out of the closet when I became familiar with the song. But when I saw that musical, That was a very interesting point in my life. I had moved to New York and I had been there for maybe 3 or 4 years and I wasn't landing anything. And I think I was still swiping cards as for living at a gym membership. And when I saw Wicked, the song Defying Gravity kind of hit me. And I was like, you know what? I did not move here to swipe cards for a living. I moved here to be an actor. Something. And I had friends that told me I was delusional. And within a year, I had had a movie on TV and the TV station logo. And I had a career, and people were kind of like, wow, who do you think you are? And so the song Defying Gravity really spoke to me at that time. That was 2003, 2004 when that was happening for me. And so recently, I have relocated to the Midwest and I went and saw the movie Wicked. I knew that I had seen it on Broadway, but I had kind of forgotten the significance of it for me. And the minute the music started, I was like, I do kind of remember this song. By the end of the movie, I was sobbing and defying gravity. You know what? It doesn't matter where I live. I can be an actor anywhere, and I'm going to do it. And within 6 months, I have an agent, and I am doing a show.
Hey.
That's how the world works. So it is spiritually significant to me.
Well, Darren, it's kind of funny that you said that, and then Andy's wearing a Tu Wong Fu shirt. There is that Noxzema Jackson quote. She goes, "I don't need to go to California. I can make she goes, I can make Hollywood wherever I am."
Right.
Which is such a beautiful quote. See, I've never been a Wicked stan, and I want to give it an opportunity and a chance. I think my only qualms with it was I don't like prequels and trequels and sequels and all of that because I thought it changed my only.
You don't like Testament. That's all.
The only qualm I had was the Scarecrow thing because I wanted him to not whatever. I'm weird like that. But then again, I love The Wiz a lot more than The Wizard of Oz. So, do you have any sort of agreements or anything that you want to add further about Wicked, Andy?
Well, yeah, there's so much to say about Wicked. I gave a talk at our Wizard of Oz tribute, and I started with talking about Wicked, and I said basically Wicked is a piece of queer fanfic that's been written for 125 years. It is a like collaborative work of queer fanfic, and when we get to like this iteration, it literally is a queer rom-com. I sat watching the film, and when they have their like dorm sequence with the number popular, and when they do the split screen, I was like, that's right out of Pillow Talk. And so they're quoting like a 1950s, Rock Hudson, Doris Day, which is pretty queer right there, little rom-com, and so it's like one's a force of nature, one's uptight, right? Classic rom-com formula, and the way that they use the movie musical and how the musical uses dance, right? So dance typically in the movie genre is like when the actors synchronize their dance, then the courtship is successful, right? If you think about like Singing in the Rain is a really great example of that, right? That Don Lockwood starts in synchronization with Cosmo, but eventually has to hand off and become in synchronization with Kathy, right? And there's that beautiful sequence, Good Morning, where they kind of have a three-way and kind of hand off that it's true. Like, and they're swapping each other's clothes. It's very fun and playful. I love Singing in the Rain. We could talk about that too. But the way that this movie uses the tropes of the Hollywood musical to get them to synchronize their dance at the Shiv University, and then they literally leave prom. It's a prototypical kind of teen rom-com from the 80s moment when they leave prom together. So that's another reason to kind of really think about Wicked. The author Gregory Maguire, who wrote the novel, was a man who was AIDS generation like me, right? And so thinking about how do we respond to fascism? How do we form coalitions? How do we stay woke, which has always been one of the kind of themes of Wizard of Oz, right? Dorothy is always in danger of falling asleep, and she needs to stay woke. So I think it's a really important queer text, and one that because the queer version of Wizard of Oz is that she never leaves Oz, right? Because she had a family there, she had a role. The tragedy of Wizard of Oz is that she ever went back to that shithole Kansas. So, yeah, I think that has been the act of reclaiming of Wizard of Oz for queer people.
And then you've got Journey Back to Oz and Return to Oz, where she goes back and has two different
Totally.
experiences.
Hey, you know what? In the book, it's not a dream. It's a real place she goes to. And later on in the series, she brings Auntie Em and Uncle Henry to Oz because it's better. It's clearly better. And so, yeah, I mean, Oz has always been like L. Frank Baum's utopia, essentially. That's they kind of like to judge America kind of by its failures.
And I'll briefly talk about mine, which is very, very short. Uh, Godspell, which had a
Mm,
huge, the film version of Godspell had a really huge impact on me because I grew up quite religious. I mean, my family, both of my parents were ministers. And so I was obsessed at 13 with Jesus Christ Superstar, way obsessed with Jesus Christ Superstar. Actually interviewed Glenn Carter on this
mm,
podcast who played Jesus Christ Superstar, Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar 2000, which was my favorite version because it's very fascist and gritty, and
mm,
it takes away the glamour of it all. And I was obsessed with Jesus Christ Superstar, and then I liked it because it sort of made me question everything that I ever thought about this figure of Jesus, but also it took away the mystique and it went into the subconscious of Jesus and portrayed him as a real human being that was in the right time at the right place or the wrong time at the wrong place.
mm,
And but then I saw Godspell, and so there's a really interesting dichotomy and sort of a yin yang with Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. Jesus Christ Superstar is very dark. It might
mm,
have beautiful, glamorous glamour and sequins, etc., but it's a very dark, depressing musical. Whereas Godspell is the complete opposite. And so I was sort of at that age of 13, whatever, when I was obsessed with Jesus Christ Superstar, because this was the beginning of my rebellious phase, so rebelling against organized religion. But then I
mm,
saw Godspell that sort of pulled me back a bit in terms of its message, because you had Victor Garber, a gay man, playing
mm,
Jesus as a
mm,
clown with a vaudeville troupe that is a flower child hippie, and you've got a black woman, you've got a black man, you've got a gay man, you've got a Hispanic woman, you've got an Italian man, you've got his disciples that are three what is it like four men and four women. And I thought that was a really interesting um thought that was a really, really interesting way to sort of tell the gospel of the story of the gospel is through that sort of flower child hippie activist sort of way. And the music's
mm,
beautiful and the movie's beautiful. The movie was shot in New York City.
mhm,
And they used, the back New York City as the backdrop for the entire film. And it's just very beautiful. And it's they adapt Christ's messages in the lyrics and the way it's told and the whole flower child movement and the hippie sort of hair type themes and the hair type symbolism and just the beauty, even like the way that the finale is very, very beautiful. So they don't crucify this hippie flower child Jesus, they tie him to a fence. But
mhm,
even then they take the body of the dead Christ and carry it through the streets of New York City. So I think Godspell, and there was something very inclusive about Godspell because I mean it still doesn't get its just dues. It still doesn't get its recognition or its flowers. But I think Godspell is such a beautiful way to tell the gospel without being religious or being overtly spiritual. But there's something beautiful about Godspell. I mean, I always resonated with the fact that Christ was played by a gay man. And
mm,
there was, three female disciples and three male disciples, or four female disciples and four male disciples from different genders and backgrounds and different ethnic backgrounds. And I just thought it was a beautiful way. And when they're all dressed up in vaudeville and the whole I'll digress, but like the beginning of the film, for those who haven't seen Godspell, uh this Jesus figure and John the Baptist figure call these disciples, and they're working men and working women. They work in office buildings or a library, or they're cab drivers, or they're waitresses, and they literally throw all their clothes into the fountain in New York City and become hippies. So I think there's something really beautiful about that. has anybody ever seen Godspell or heard about Godspell? I would, it's got Lynn Thigpen who played the moon in Bear in the Big Blue House, but she was also in the show Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So it's a beautiful, so do you have any thoughts about Godspell, Andy?
It's been a while, but I do remember that that's when I played a lot, a little 13-year-old gay boy singing along too. So that's my main memory of it, as singing along to the songs. It was probably like a bridge for me too, of like I grew up Catholic and like trying to find something that was musical, but that wasn't a Voct church, but it was a different type of church than I grew up in.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell both came out at the same time. Neither one of them copied from one another. They were both in
Mm,
production at the same time, but they told two different contrasting versions of Jesus. I mean,
mhm,
Godspell is written by Stephen Schwartz, who did the music for Wicked.
mhm,
So, that was his that was his college, I think, thesis was to do Godspell. So you had the Jesus Christ Superstar that was like total Tim Rice and Angela Weber fighting against organized religion. They did not believe Jesus was God at all.
mm,
But Stephen Schwartz didn't say it didn't matter if Jesus was God. His message would still resonate with everybody. And basically he was saying that Jesus was the first flower child, that he was the first
mm,
hippie, and it shows that in Godspell. Before Andy moves into his film with spiritual significance, does anyone have any
mhm,
thoughts or observations about Godspell?
I think you hit it on the head about Jesus being the first hippie. I mean, realistically, I mean, if you go back and, I mean, the Bible it conflicts with itself in every single way, but the one big takeaway though is that like Jesus hung out with the misfits.
mhm,
That's the whole point of, what Christianity should be is that, loving thy neighbor and being part of the that marginalized part of society that, at that time, if we're going back 2000 years and Roman occupied Judea,
mhm,
these were the misfits. He hung out with the people that you did not want to associate with, the tax collectors and the prostitutes. And it really, works as a film transposing that to modern day, which at that time, what, 1971, 1972,
Yeah.
um, it would make sense that they're hippies. And I do have a fondness for Godspell. I was part of church choir in my Catholic school, and our Catholic masses, it was interesting because it was like Vatican II, so like maybe it was like 20 years old at the time. So this was like when, mass was in English, and it was a lot more community oriented than like the typical Roman rite. So our church was a little bit more flexible in terms of just like what we could get away with. And I know Godspell was music that we sang in church at certain times. And it was interesting, like day by
mhm,
day, like in a Catholic church, you would think that was, blasphemous. But, I was fortunate that I was part of a church at that time that was a little bit more flexible.
And
And the message,
Darren, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, and
Oh,
the message,
no, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
oh, I said just, and the message resonates. That's really
I
it.
was going to tell, since Darren
mhm,
loves Wicked, since it's from the composer of Wicked, you're going to be on there when we talk about Godspell, if any of you do, because it's so beautiful.
mhm,
And I would just say, I'll leave this at the digress, and you can talk, Andy. When I taught
mm,
university, I taught the Gospels as literature from a feminist point of
mm,
view, and I
mhm,
showed Godspell in there
mm,
because Jesus did have female disciples, and that was
mm,
very unusual for
mm,
for Israel at the particular time, the Middle East, to have an unmarried man, have female disciples. I mean,
mm,
in my thesis that I'm doing now, I mentioned Mary Magdalene, the real Mary
mhm,
Magdalene, and how she was called Jesus's most beloved disciple. And they play upon that
yep,
in Godspell, how the women are more devoted than the men are.
mm,
Ain't that the
mhm,
way? But
mm.
Andy,
Yeah.
what is your musical with spiritual significance?
So I shared a link with y'all to an event that I did at Meow Wolf. One of our first ones there was a tribute to Sister Act. And so kind of obvious, but the way that it presents the spiritual topic, I think, is really, really fascinating. This is a film that originally was supposed to cast Bette Midler in the role. But when Whoopi Goldberg took on the role, it takes on a real kind of like significance, right? You see the kind of sublimated racism of the cloister. But I think that there's also, if you read between the lines, there's a real queerness to Sister Act. In fact, it was written by Paul Rudnick, who famously wrote Jeffrey, In and Out. And one of the books he used to research the film was called Break the Silence, Lesbian Nuns. And so his research was looking at how the cloister offered like a sanctuary for lesbians often. And if you read between the lines, there's a scene where Mary, I forget the short redhead girl who wants to find her voice. But anyway, she comes and she has
Sister
this scene
Mary
where it's
Clarence, is that what it is?
Mary Gallagher? I can't remember. Anyway, um, she comes to Whoopi's room and she says something like, do you ever want to be yourself so bad it hurts? And Whoopi's basically like, sing out, Louise. And then she does, and it's about her like finding her voice. But it's so coded, and I think kind of like delicious that way. So when we did Sister Act, though, it was amazing how many people. I don't think of it as like a cosplay kind of film, but so many people dressed up as nuns, and it was super fun. I dressed up as a big gay pope. Oh, when Paul Rednick wrote it, he says he wanted it to be pop versus pope, and pop in a flurry of sequins wins. That was his like original concept for it. So I love that. And our kind of pink candle design for Whoopi Goldberg is based on Christ the Redeemer, because she is the Redeemer figure, right?
So
And the
you
third
think,
one, sorry.
go ahead, Mary.
Mhm.
Sorry, I just called you Mary.
Mary Amber.
Listen, okay. Well, the third Sister Act is going to be coming out sometime soon, and it's really interesting
Yeah.
that it's being written and directed by Tyler Perry, who is very famous for, Medea.
Right, right, absolutely. Oh, Tyler Perry. I don't know.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a subtle hand. That's my problem with him. Like when he did gosh, for Colored Girls, it was just so heavy-handed, and it lost the text
Mhm.
subtlety.
Yeah.
I will give Tyler Perry one thing. I
Mhm.
think, and I'll give Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire one thing. My family loved Tyler Perry, loved Medea and all that. And so I think drag softened the blow for when I came out finally. And I
Mm.
mean, I think that the drag, and it was like, I'm like, well, you love Medea and all that. So I think it was family friendly drag. I think there's always been
Yeah.
figures like that, like Dame Edna. And,
hmm Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire.
so Andy, you argue that Sister Act has a spiritual significance and impact for queer people, or just people in
hmm
general, or both?
For people in general, I would say I think that it is for people who have felt alienated by churches, and that is pretty intrinsic to the queer experience, I would say. And so, but yeah, anyone who felt like, and I went through this, like when I said no thanks to the Catholic Church, I kind of was like, I guess I'm all empirical now. Like, I guess I'm atheist agnostic, somewhere in that. But then my later life, I've been embracing spirituality and Buddhism, but for a long time I was kind of like, well, religion's just not for me. I guess I should find something else. And so finding a film that like wants to widen the fold is I think really powerful.
Now, the second question I asked for y'all, and we'll get into the closing of this, is a musical or a cult musical that has spiritual significance to you and it can be something as as obvious as Wicked or Tommy or Godspell, or it could be something completely different. No one can dictate to you what's important to you. I find beauty. I cry in Showgirls. When Nomi is on the Las Vegas Strip and she's looking out into Vegas and she's like, I made it. I cry in
Mm.
Showgirls. Did. So we can go around and we'll end with yours, Andy, about its spiritual significance to you. So just guys briefly talk about the cult musical or musical that you chosen and how and why it had a spiritual significance, particularly to you. And it can go in any order. Amber?
Okay. I was like, I didn't want to go first again. Mine is obviously, again, like I said, Across the Universe. It came out at a time when I think it was very relevant for me. I was in the process of leaving the church. And so for that film, for the teenagers or the young people in that film, it's the Vietnam War. It's, what they're going against basically what their parents have always told them, what is correct and what is not. So it's very like set in reality, but at the same time for me, I was in the church and I found the church to be dictating my life a lot, and because I was asking questions and that you're not supposed to do. And so at that point too, it was like me separating from the people who were supposed to be, my confidants in life, and they're all like, no, we're staying in the church, and I'm like, that's not for me anymore. So that film came at a very significant time in my life where I was seeing the young people in that film, through song, trying to find themselves as well. So there's a lot of themes in that film that you can't even. We'd have to have like a whole like lecture just about that film, I think, by
And
itself.
I think Andy can agree. That movie was critically reviled, and it's still underrepresented and underappreciated.
And I'm not even a Beatles fan, but Hey Jude is like my favorite song of all time because of that film. Because it was like,
Yeah.
hey, go find yourself, go do what you want. Don't care about what everybody else says. Go do it. I will still be here for you. You just go do what you want.
Yeah.
That's quite deep. Does it still have the same spiritual impact and significance to you, or has it grown and evolved as you've gotten older?
It's still there. I think certain moments in your life as you age, there are certain like I said, moments that just stick with you. So if you revisit it, you're like, yeah, I still feel that because that is still something from my past. So
Andy, do you have any thoughts about Across the Universe or what it symbolizes?
Not too much. I've seen it once. I remember like you guys said, as like more of like a series of music videos, and I think some of the videos were more successful than others. And so my recall is like "Happiness is a Warm Gun." I thought was such a cool video. It had this like mandala sort of erotic mandala thing. It was really, really beautiful to look at. So that's the one that sticks in my brain.
yeah, my granddad he's a Vietnam vet, so like a lot of that stuff too is very prevalent in my everyday life anyway. It still
Right.
is today because he's still around and still talks about it. So it's just a lot of like personal connections, but like specifically like leaving the church and leaving the church like family and friends and stuff like that was very significant at that time in my life.
And Across the
Derek,
Universe is one of my favorite songs. So yeah, that's an easy one for me to love.
it's a beautiful film. It's a
Yeah.
I love the underwater. I don't know what song it is. It's the one they start off a cappella and they're underwater. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Darren and Polly, what is y'all's choices for spiritual significance to you in a cult musical?
Spiritual significance for me personally is not Wicked, actually. It's Dreamgirls. Dreamgirls came into my sphere of the world at a very interesting part of my life. I've been a Diana Ross and the Supremes fan since I could talk. So records, TV shows, VHS tapes, I collected the whole thing. Dreamgirls I missed on Broadway. I was too young to see it. It didn't come to my town, but I had heard the music on people's record players, but I didn't know what it was. And then the musical came to Indianapolis when I was 17, and I went to see it kind of dumb. I went to kind of hate watch it. It was like, it's bad. This is going to be bad. And within the first 15 minutes, I was like, oh my God, does anyone know what this is? It like took my breath away. I went and saw it 8 times. It has become a thing where if I had more space, I would have been the person on eBay collecting all of the posters and all of that sort of thing. And there's a lyric from the titular song Dreamgirls, where they say, all you've got to do is dream. And that has stuck with me. And that's kind of been throughout my entire life. It's just like people always telling me that because of circumstances, I can't do X, Y, Z. All you've got to do is dream. So that's something that has always stuck with me. And I think that Dreamgirls qualifies as a cult movie musical because there is big conflict about whether or not they should have gone that whole Supremes route with it, or maybe they should have been a little bit more subtler with it. There's a bunch of casting controversies, and I didn't like the script. I thought Beyonce was great. I just didn't like the script, and I didn't like the editing of songs from the original score. So yeah, Dreamgirls is mine.
Andy, do you have any thoughts or observations about Dreamgirls that you could give us?
I can tell you my favorite line from Dreamgirls. I say a lot, which is just because you throw confetti in my face, it don't make it no party.
They cut that from the movie.
Did they really? No, doesn't she say it? Oh,
From the
fuck,
song. Wait, maybe they left it in there, but they cut the song from.
Yeah. Yeah, she says it right before they go on stage, I think, or right after, one of the two. Yeah. I love that line.
And Darren, has that movie sort of evolved with you and grown with you to where you still carry it with you and you see sort of like why you need it at certain times in your life?
Yes and no, because I go back and forth between I think it was a brilliant movie, and then I go, I hated it. I love it. I hated it. I hate it. So yeah. And then it satisfied me at the time that it came out. I saw it at the premiere at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York. It was beautiful. I cried. And then when I saw the DVD, I was like, I hated this. Like, this is garbage. They wrecked the whole second half of the movie. Like, this is trash. So you got to catch me at the right time and where I am. Emotions, and I'll tell you whether or not it's relevant. That's one of the movies I'm like, that could stand a reboot or a remake, though.
Oh, wow. Oh,
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I've never seen it live, but the ending for the movie, it ended and I was like, what the hell? It just stopped. I was like, keep going, give me more. Like, I need you to end right. Does it end like that in the stage adaptation?
It ends like that in the stage adaptation.
Yeah, that would kill me.
Like, you don't even see like the daughter. Like there's like talk of it, but it's much more alluded to. Like it's obvious movie. Yeah, it ends like that.
Oh gosh, that would kill me. Okay.
I can't.
Sorry.
I can't do open-ended. I can't. I need finality and conclusion. That's why I can't. That's why I can't stop with Scarlett O'Hara. After all, tomorrow is another day. I'm like, give us some more, honey.
That bothered me. I was like, what happens?
I have to have happily ever after. I don't care if even The Exorcist. Amber can allude to this. I always wanted to write The Exorcist as a musical.
There is
with music by Taylor Dane and Tiffany.
James, I've been having dreams about this past week. I don't know what's happening. The universe is doing something to me. So let's talk.
There is an Exorcist musical.
Yeah.
An unauthorized one. A friend of mine, an actor named Jesse Merlin, plays Marin, and it's I think they did like a short run like off Broadway like a year ago. I missed
We need
it.
Polly, I know it. Maybe you'll surprise us, but Polly, what's your musical of spiritual significance to you?
So again, with the term spiritual, to me, it's more of like the human spirit, our ability to come together, which is funny because like I detest like the church, but Rocky Horror is a mass, and I am a participant of it, and I run a cast, and I organize things, and it's a weird dichotomy for me to like reconcile because I remember my first time seeing it in movie theater with a shadow cast was over 20 years ago. And I didn't really click with it, but like the thing that I remember the most was the call and response of the AP. And this was back when the movie was actually shown at midnight, because a lot of shadow casts no longer do that. We don't do that. And it reminded me of church. It reminded me of the liturgy. It reminded me of the pageantry of the priest and the costumes and everything. So to be now almost 20 years into this and its ability to create community and to bring together just all sorts of walks of life of people together for a commonality for a cult film, to me is like probably the most spiritual thing in my life. And I am, myself, my wife, and a couple of others are the ones that are the over 30 club. So we are the elders. We are seen as basically the parents for many of these kids. And by kids, I mean, you know, 18 and older, but like still college age. So they're still finding themselves. I have a lot of trans youth that, their family lives are not exactly like ideal. So when they know that, like, hey, you could come up to my wife and I's house, we could do costumes together, we could rehearse if you need some help, you need a hot meal, you come to us. We're your mama and your papa. And we've created a house for many of our members who do not feel as though like they fit in with society, or especially now, especially the way that our country is. And it's, I don't want to be a pessimist, but it's only going to get progressively worse unless we find our ways to fight back in terms of being, just as a community of just people, of allies together. So Rocky Horror is this bastion for it, for us. And it, my wife, who's the MC of our show, always says at, the beginning of our show as the MC, these four walls are a safe space. You do not have to worry here. It is sanctuary, like a church should be. It's funny that, the guy that basically originated this Sal Puro was a theology major. He went to school to become a priest and then decided, no, I'm going to become a comedian. And then found his way to Rocky Horror Picture Show one night with his friends. And then it became like his, part of his life for a good, 40 odd years. And this tradition has carried on across the country, across the world, where, new casts spring up every few years like churches do. And the way that we treat ours not as dogmatic to like how Rocky Horror sometimes might be in another part of the country. We're Gnostics, we're the weirdos. And I think that's something that, is beautiful and has resonated with me, and clearly like is probably the most spiritual aspect of my life, is just doing this show every, few weeks.
I was going to say that about Polly. Polly and I and a few others interviewed Lilius Piro, Sal Piro's sister, and the way that she got emotional talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show and why it sort of just came out of nowhere. And it was the way that she got emotional talking about what it means to people, the sanctuary that it gives people, the family that it gives people, the religion that it gives people, and also just the comfort that it gives people. Yes, it's about the movie itself, but it's more about the community, the Rocky Horror community. And when you're talking, Polly, it just reminded me of just how touched I was actually by Lilius talking about why Sal did it and talking about making it the cult movie that it is, because it really means some form of family to people. And I'm sure you've talked about that, Andy, haven't you? About why Rocky Horror is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's the grandmommy of them all, really. And I think, yeah, Paula, to your point, this idea of a sanctuary, I think what's two things I think really remarkable about Rocky Horror. One is that it is one of our few radically shame-free spaces, that when people come in, you quickly understand that no one gets shamed for how they represent their gender. You know what I mean? And with the Rocky Horror Troupe that I use, they rotate the cast through every role, and so it doesn't matter whatever your gender, you can play any role that you want to, and that's something that is so fascinating about Rocky Horror and so special about it. And then the fact that we're on the 50-year anniversary, and this is to me the only collaborative piece of art that constantly renews its participation with each generation. Because I'm assuming this is true with your troupe as well, Polly, that these are not like 50-year-olds, who are typically making up the bulk of the troupe. It's young people. And so there's something about this text that speaks to youth, as well. Polly, you have any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. You hit it in the nail on the head. And in fact, our cast rotates. My Columbia last show, is a 6'7" Canadian male.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't care as long as like you have that drive and you feel as though like I want,
Hmm.
we're gonna give you the shot. Like it
But
to me,
yeah, but it's so fascinating. Like if you have like a female presenting Frankenfurter and a female presenting Rocky, suddenly
Mhm.
it's a lesbian text. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it changes the text itself.
And I think that that's what makes the Shadowcast experience so special. Yeah, at least the
Hmm.
ones that understand like the assignment is that the movie will always be the movie. It is constant. It is
Hmm.
the text. It is the literal text of
Right.
church.
Hmm.
But your participants will always be
Hmm.
different. They're always bringing something new to it, and that's what keeps
Hmm.
it going. You know, there's
Yeah.
a reason why we're at the 50th anniversary of it. It's
Hmm.
not going to die unless um people decide one day that like I no longer want to do this, or the film
Hmm.
finds its way into the Disney vault,
Oh,
which will
Yeah.
never which that'll
But it
never
never will, right? It's a living, breathing piece of fanfic, which is
exactly.
so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there, you could do a whole, study on it. Like, I'm sure
Oh,
that
there's many.
there have
Yeah,
been,
there's
I was actually interviewed for one. So clearly,
yeah.
like, um, this film, this story, just in general, not even just the film, but the play itself, the
Uh-huh.
text of it still resonates. And Richard O'Brien just recently had a documentary made about him from his son, Linus. And
Mm,
um, I've yet to see it, but like something that stood out from the quote that I've seen from it, and it's remarkably just like it's sad, but like Richard O'Brien basically saying that like when I wrote this 50 years ago, things were very hard for queer people, and here we are 50 years
hmm.
later, and they still are. Nothing has
Hmm.
For every two steps forward, you're taking a step back, and I'm an ally, but I see what's happening, and I see it happening to my cast members who are terrified of their future, and it breaks my heart.
Mm.
And the least I could do is just provide like a few hours of like,
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about the world. You are here to
yeah,
just have a fun fucking time and do whatever you want to do, and
yeah.
just make sure you're safe. That's all that matters.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
and I will say that Rocky Horror, and before I move on to mine, Rocky Horror, of course, was the queen of it all. And I think it
Hmm.
represented community and stuff. But something similar happened in Winnipeg, Canada with Phantom of the Paradise, which
Mhm.
Mm.
happened a year before. And I'm friends with Dell and Gloria, who were the ones that started Phantom Palooza and stuff. So it's like different movies come along at the right time. And the reason they're
Hmm.
kept along and the reason they're kept alive is because of the fan base, but also because of its the thing like Wizard of Oz and everything with Oz and with Rocky Horror. It seems that they reflect different trends that happen and it's kind of scary, but they're always relevant. They're always
Hmm.
relevant, with Don't Dream It, Be It, with Rocky
Mm.
Horror, and with Oz, with being othered and trying to find a safe haven, a safe space.
Hmm.
That's what's so powerful about film. And I'm so glad
Hmm.
that you teach your students that film doesn't just have to be 90 minutes to 2 hours of just unadulterated, just cringe viewing or something, that it
Sure.
can change your life. It
Oh,
can change the
absolutely.
trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
Um,
One,
mine
I mean,
was,
one,
go ahead.
okay, good.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, one more thing on Rocky Horror, just like why it's such a dynamic text and why it will always be kind of timeless is that it's punk, right? And like, what is more punk right now than fucking with gender? Like that is the most punk thing that you can do. And so it's so relevant there. And what's special about Rocky Horror is that often the marginalized people have to go into normative spaces and you deal with their conflict, right? Of being a fish out of water. What's cool about Rocky Horror is that the normies have to come into the freak show, right? The normies come into the queer space. They are alchemized by their experiences in queerness, and then they have to go back, right? And the queer people don't have to change. So that's what I think is really special about Rocky Horror.
Yeah, because that's told through the story of Brad and Janet, not only through Rocky
Hmm.
Horror, but through Shock
Sure.
Treatment. They're the ones that are normal to us, but are weird
Hmm.
in that world.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I do. I don't know what your thoughts about this are. So I have two that have a spiritual significance. And the first one is The Wiz for one reason,
Mhm.
or two reasons. One, because Michael Jackson's always been an incredibly important figure in my life.
Mhm.
Always. Love him. And not only because of Oz, because I mean the whole the story of Oz, but I had to make sure I looked at the quote to get it right. But there's a quote within The Wiz that I've lived my life through. I've tried to live my life by, and I've lost it, of course, with different periods of my life where I was in and out with who I was as a person. But Michael Jackson at the end of the film says, "Success, fame, and fortune, they're all illusions. All that all there is that is real is the friendship that two can share." And I just thought that was like, I just have always sort of held that in my heart, not only because I love Michael Jackson, but that quote is like so important, especially in the time that we live in with, the media and mass media manipulation and fear and warmongering and fear-mongering. Is that the only thing that really truly matters at the end of the day is relationships that you not only have with yourself, but others. And I think that's really, really important. And I have to really remember that sometimes because I can isolate myself a lot sometimes out of, I guess, I think I find isolation cathartic sometimes where like I just completely cut off contact with everybody in the world. But I have to
Mhm.
learn and repeat that I do that. I'm really notorious for that. I get really overwhelmed with the world. So I try to like isolate myself. But then like that quote, it sort of creeps up sometimes when it's like, the only thing that matters is the community, whether it's one person or a herd of people. I think we as humans, it was really important for us to have that. And knowing, of course, as being a Michael Jackson aficionado, what that film represented to him, because that was before Thriller, that was before Off the Wall. So it was
Mhm.
his first time leaving. He was living with his parents when he did The
Mhm.
Wiz. And he moved to New York with LaToya. And that was his
Mhm.
first time having any independence. And so there's some sort of symbolism with him as well. So
Mhm.
before I move on to my biggest one, do you have any thoughts about that quote, Andy?
I don't know about the quote necessarily, but I also love the Wiz and what it does to not just sort of speak back to the 1939 film, but go back to what Frank Baum was saying about like the dangers of being distracted. And their version of the Emerald City is basically like Studio 20 or Studio 54, and about the danger of mistaking comfort for quality, essentially is one of the really powerful things that I take away from that film.
And the second one, which is it's not spiritually deep, but it is to me, is Teen Witch, which Teen Witch means so much to me. It always has. And I mean, it's 80s, it's fabulous, but it came at the right time in my life of like, the ugly duckling becoming a popular girl, no pun intended, and then getting the person that she wants to love her, but then getting all these magical powers to sort of like punish those who bullied her, and then getting everything that she wants, but at the end of the film, she decides to give it all away. And so like it was a really it sort of goes in lines with like my interest in the occult and esoteric and things. But there's a quote that Madame Serena, of course, who's from Poltergeist, says is that the real power is believing in yourself. And if you can do that, you can make anything happen. So I just like I've always found Teen Witch to be sort of like an ugly duckling story, but that quote, like the real power and real magic is believing in yourself. And so I find beauty, I'm obsessed with Teen Witch. I find there's so much beauty and think it's so underrepresented and it deserves more recognition. But I don't know, Teen Witch has always been like so important to me. Still to this day, I love Teen Witch and I just think the whole like if I was Louise, I would not. I would use that necklace to make everything happen. But it's sort of like she gets everything that she wants, but she doesn't want anything to come easy to her at the end. She's willing to give everything away because she would rather work hard for what she gets versus having everything given to her. I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that, Andy?
I don't. Maybe one of the other uh, group.
I love Teen Witch. I love Teen Witch. It's spiritually important to me. What's your
Let's
musical?
Okay, so the really traditional musical I would say is Rent. We recently did a sing-along tribute to Rent. It's the 30th anniversary of the stage play, the 20th of the film. It's hard to believe that's that old. But I was like a little theater kid in high school, and so of course I loved Rent and singing it, and but we wanted to like revisit the act of like singing together. And this is one of the other kind of like things we're doing with Rainbow Cult. We have the immersive cosplay kind of film screenings, the Rocky Horror type film screenings. And then we have just like a really simple sing-along program. And because I think movie theaters become spaces where we're supposed to be so quiet, right? And so what if this is what Wicked learned, right? When they released the film is that people wanted to sing. And so they created these special sing-along events. And I was like, oh, I could do that, right? There are lots of things that I bet people would love to sing along to. So we started with Rent, and people did exactly what we hoped they would do. They were in the aisles, they were dancing, they were singing. We had one of the original cast members, Rodney Hicks, there to talk about his experiences in the Broadway show. Tracy Toms, which is a friend of his, that played Joanne. She Skyped in and talked to us. So it was a really special event. It was for one of the oldest aid service organizations here in Denver, a benefit. So all of that made it just like a really emotional experience. And looking back at it, it's such a time capsule of like anger and rage, right? And what do we do with that? So that's my more traditional answer. I definitely cried watching that at that event. And then I don't know, my last like, is it a musical? Would maybe be To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. Which I think is a music-driven film, and although the characters don't break out into song, it still hits all the beats of a traditional musical. Um, and I love it because it uses this trope of the non-binary healer that we see in Queer Eye from the Straight Guy, or To Wong Fu, or Kinky Boots, or Priscilla Queen of the Desert, where they go to these like beleaguered small towns and release their repression. And so if Rocky Horror is about like the normies coming into the queer space and being alchemized and freed, from their repression, this is, I think, the more dangerous act, which is like going out into the red states and engaging with people and changing their minds, and letting them see how homophobia affects everyone, right? It affects how navigate your world in ways that you don't even realize how you're restricting yourself. So that's what I find really special about To Wong Fu. And it's got banger music. So we did a To Wong Fu event here in Denver. We've done it twice actually, and this is a like little unicorn design for it. And people ate it up. And I think it is just one of those films that, at least for a niche queer audience, everyone knows it. But beyond that, I don't think most street people even know about the film. So yeah, so that one I think is a pretty spiritual film for me.
I I can't speak for everybody, but I know a couple of people here, including myself. Tu Wong Fu was a very, very important movie to them. So I don't know if Tu
Mhm.
Wong Fu is important to everybody else here, if you've seen it or it's important to you.
I love it. In fact, a former Rocky Horror friend of mine is in it. Perry Poley, with
Wow,
the drag queens in the club.
amazing. With
Yeah.
Rachel Tensions coming down on a swing. Got it.
RuPaul as a drag queen called Rachel Tensions
One
was
of my favorite things ever.
genius.
Oh, it's so
In the
good.
Confederate flag dress. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Oh.
I was talking about Tu Wong Fu to somebody yesterday. I was like, you don't understand. I mean, RuPaul, we're not going to go into this, but Tu Wong Fu represented sort of RuPaul was loved by everybody in America in the 90s. It didn't matter who you were, what background you were from. Punks, rednecks, everybody loved RuPaul. He paved the way and he deserves his flowers. But Tu Wong Fu, Priscilla at Queen of the Desert, it's unfortunately compared to that too much, unjustly.
Mm,
Priscilla's
yeah,
quite Priscilla's quite hard to watch. I mean, I love Priscilla, but
it it
it's
doesn't age well.
yes, there's definitely some this very over sexual. It's this, that, and the other. There's lots of violence. But the
Yep.
thing about Tu Wong Fu, people say it's too family friendly, but it shows that these people just
That's
happen to be drag queens.
right. That's the cleverness of it, is it's like a Trojan horse film, you know what I mean? And where it gets to in terms of it's some radical politics is really smart in this like candy shell.
And it has the three most macho men of all time playing, Wesley Snipes, John Leguizamo, Patrick Swayze, and they
You know,
all
Patrick Swayze got the role because he dressed in drag and walked around a city block and no one clocked him. That's what it made the directors give him the role.
Vita Bowen, Noxeema Jackson, and Chichi Rodriguez.
Chi-chi.
It's important. That movie's
More
really
legs and a
important.
bucket of chicken.
Uh, Darren, have you ever seen Tu Wong Fu? Thanks for everything, Julie Newmar.
I have.
What do you feel about that film?
I have.
Is it
I,
straight men playing queer roles?
I do have a bit of an issue with the straight man, the queer
Sure.
role as a queer actor. I do remember seeing it when it came out and being like, okay. But I also have a history with it because a lot of the drag queens that taught me how to do makeup were in Tu as extras and were cut out. So anytime anybody in Tu Wong Fu, there was a lot of so that's not really one of those movies that I've got a lot of fond stuff about because I've just heard so much bad stuff about it.
Fair.
But I do think the message, I mean, that there's so much that happens. I think it was mainstream drag, which was like something that happened in the 90s. But I just think there's something so wholesome about it. And it's kind of unusual to have a PG-13 wholesome
Totally.
drag queen movie. But there's something so beautiful about it. And I love
Yeah.
John Leguizamo sees the film differently than Patrick Swayze did or Wesley Snipes did. I watched a recent interview with John Leguizamo who said that his character arc was about his character accepting his Latinness, as he said, that his makeup got darker as the film progressed. And so he was Chi-Chi. To him, the way that he modeled Chi-Chi was that Chi-Chi's face was very white and very Caucasian in the beginning of the movie. But at the end, her makeup is now darker and she's accepting being Latin. She's not trying to change who she is to fit into the drag, the racism of drag sometimes. And so
Or white
his
beauty standard in general.
and so I think that's and Patrick Swayze, I mean, that was got to be, I mean, Robin Williams was up for the role. Then he became John Jacob
Imagine.
Jingleheimer Schmidt. His name is my name too. But I don't know. I've always loved I love that film. And I think it's really important to show that like maybe it's unrealistic, unfortunately, but maybe that's the idea,
That's
the
the fantasy
ideal
of it.
world of what we can
Yeah.
live in is where
Totally.
3 6 foot drag, well, besides John Leguizamo, 3 6 foot drag queens can go to a Nebraska town and change it for the positive, which I think that movie gives me a little bit of hope, Andy, that maybe besides what separates us, there is more that brings us together, and that maybe people can see the humanity within each of us, no matter what we look like or who we are.
Yeah, totally.
Have you ever taught Tu Wong Fu in your classes?
I haven't, but you know, I teach a genre course and I break it up into like 5 week genre pieces. So we did the rom-com, we did the teen pick, and for the last unit, I had the road movie as a genre, and I think that's a really interesting inclusion in the road movie because the road movie is usually centered around those who are already in power, so like Ferris Bueller, and they basically go in and they dominate any space that they entered, and it has a kind of colonialism to it because it's Western expansion narrative, but this is flips it on its head, right? And so these sort of very disenfranchised citizens find pleasure. It actually probably has more in common with like Thelma and Louise than it does the typical road movie, which I think is really fascinating.
Do you have any further observations or anything about why we should look at cult movies and cult musicals in general in a different light before we end? Do you think, is there anything, any sort of wisdom you would like to impart not only to us, but everyone about how we should
Yeah.
rethink and watch cult movies?
My interest in cult movies is because as a scholar, I ask different questions. I don't really care what Christopher Nolan meant when he made, Inception. That's not an interesting question to me. What I get interested in is how do audiences use something? I get especially interested in how do audiences use something that wasn't intended for them. And so that's why I love camp. And it's a different way to think about the spectator because if we only look at authorship or the film itself, we're kind of thinking of a passive model of viewership when audiences are meaning makers. And when you make a piece of art, you send it out the world, you don't own it anymore. And I get really interested in how audiences, especially minority audiences, claim ownership of something and make it useful to them. So that's what I would say is really important about cult movies.
And resurrect it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you
Absolutely.
do you think that there's like a shifting point happening right now where there's like the cult line is like being kind of faded away? Because I
Hmm.
go to the movies a lot, and like Neon and A24,
Hmm.
those movies are now becoming marketed more
Yeah.
mainstream, but you watch them
Oh,
and
yeah.
they are they reminisce cult like
Hmm.
Death of a Unicorn came out this week. I think I saw that you
Hmm.
went and saw it online. But yeah, stuff like that, and then you've got Maxine and like Pearl and
Hmm.
things of that nature.
Yeah.
It seems like the line is kind of like fading a little bit with the cult movies in general.
Yeah. I mean, we have been like progressively narrow casting films for, the last few decades, and it's been a very successful strategy. Think about like Tyler Perry, right? But we could say that like a lot of movies are cult movies in a certain sense, depending on the audience. And so when I taught this class on cult movies, I used Big Lebowski. It's not a cult movie to me, nor anyone I really know, but among like white middle class men, it is a cult object. They created a religion called Dudism, that has a whole website and thousands of members. There's a Big Lebowski convention that happens every year. And because it represents a sort of like rejection of corporate white kind of male identity. And that's very appealing to these men. And so that's really interesting. Like what I think of as a cult movie is a sliver, really. Like there are many different cult movies depending on your social identity. So yeah.
Yeah.
Polly and Darren, before we end, do you have any questions or any comments for Andy?
I'll have to take your class.
Hey, yeah, please do. Yeah, absolutely. What do we have going? We're doing Scott Pilgrim versus the World this week. Next
Yeah.
week, we are looking at the documentary about The Shining.
Oh,
And yeah, there's an essay I'm working on about the Stanley Hotel here in Colorado, which was like the inspiration for The Shining. And I'm really interested in how the hotel has installed a hedge maze to make
mhm.
itself more legible as a movie location for
Yeah.
movie tourism. And so
Yeah.
next week we're going to look at like the whole like act of movie location tourism. So we'll look
Yes.
at like why people make meccas to the Field of Dreams,
Mm,
Baseball Diamond, right, or to Hobbitville in New Zealand. Like, what's the pleasure of that sort of experience?
yeah, I could tell you right now, Oakley Court, Rocky Horror Picture Show, besides all the other Hammer horror films that were done
Yeah.
UK. But the thing with that place is that recently they kind of are like getting away from that. They used to host an
Mm,
picnic, and they're not
mm.
doing it anymore. So it's a
Well,
strange thing.
yeah.
No longer really.
Amber, I'm sure with what you do, I mean, like this sort of like the immersive Harry Potter experience, right? And so it's like a theme parking of movie fandom. Yeah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Field of Dreams. For my
Mm.
35th birthday last year, I made the pilgrimage to Iowa to stay at the Field of Dreams house. I
Yeah.
stayed there. I talked to the people who operate it and own it and all that stuff, and it's actually owned by the
Mhm.
community now. And we
Mm.
talked a lot about how people why people come there, and they actually
Mhm.
have a journal there when people stay the night at the house that people just
Mm.
write in their thoughts of why they're there
Cool.
and what it means to them. So it was really, really interesting. And there's a line in that
Mhm.
movie where they say, I think it's James Earl Jones who says, people will come, they have money, but it's peace they really want. And when you get
Mm.
there, there's like a sense of peace. Like, yes, I spent money to get here, but at the same time, the money doesn't matter. I don't
Mm.
have peace where
Mhm.
I'm at in my life that I came here to get it. And
Mm.
so like when I got there, I was like, this is very, very impactful. But
Mm.
yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about movie locations and people
Hmm.
going to them because last year they announced that the Poltergeist house you can now
Sure.
stay in it and stuff. So it's like
Hmm.
it's becoming more prominent. Yeah,
Hmm.
and what I do for work is we create those experiences. Like I was a designer on most of the Isle of Burke over at the new
Hmm.
Epic theme park. So
Hmm.
allowing people to go into How to Train Your Dragon
Yep.
and specifically children is what I went in for to do. It's overwhelming. I took my mom
Hmm.
last weekend for a preview and I just looked back at her and she's
Hmm.
just like bawling because it's
Hmm.
like you're there.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And Darren, do you have any other questions or comments for Andy?
I have a comment is I wish that I could take your class as well. One, I'm really impressed with how people can just name movies and you have a immediate recollection comment. Appreciate what you have said about The Wiz. A few years ago, I was at Pace University getting my master's degree. I took a class called Transmedia, and it was talking about story, how an idea can start as one thing and then
Yep.
into something else. And so when we got to
Yeah.
the Wiz of Oz and we talked about the Wiz and Wicked and the adaptations, we got to the Wiz chapter, and the professor was a baby boomer, and he was about how it was a flop and how nobody talks about it anymore. And I was like, wait a minute, no. That movie has been claimed by the Black community. And he was like,
Oh my God, yeah.
and he had reviews and all of this cited material
Weird.
why the movie was a flop. And he was teaching all of these 20-year-olds about this movie not being good. Now, don't listen to him. Do not we need a do-over because this is wrong. So I really appreciate the fact that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I love teaching the Wiz when I teach my Wizard of Oz class. Most of my students are white, and I said, look, this is not made for you. It's not made for me. But like, let's see what it's offering, right? And how it is channeling certain anger, right? And what's fascinating about the Wiz is that the villains are actually not white characters. It is about, the sort of like how we hold ourselves back in many ways. And so I think that's really provocative. You know what I mean? To like take an eye, right, at the own oppression within your own community, right? And how the allure of capitalism can make people lose sight of these three things, right? It's great.
I didn't even think about that. Oh wow.
Yeah.
There's
And
no
I
white.
think the only reason that the Wiz, oh, sorry, Darren, go
I
ahead.
was saying no white, and there's no white savior like those tropes.
Yep.
But
Totally.
oh wow.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason, one of the reasons that the Wiz, we've talked about the Wiz was reviled is because they set it in gritty New York City. But it was powerful setting it to New York City because like I think Darren and I talked and Polly and I talked about it. To us growing up in small towns, New York City was like the Emerald City. So
Oh
what
yeah.
other gorgeous, fantastical place than New York City to set The
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz?
Here's another way to think about the legacy of the Wiz is there would literally be no capital city in the Hunger Games without the Wiz, because the Wiz created the template that they used to create the capital city.
I love The Wiz and I would defend it all. I would defend it all day long. I think The Wiz is amazing. But thank you, Andy. I wish I could take your class. You should one day maybe write, I'm sure you are going to write a book.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
have some Patreon where we can take your classes and things.
I would love that. I would love that. I'll send you guys my other book, the Evil Child in the horror genre. You can kind of see what the biz is about that. But yeah, if y'all are in Denver, please come to one of our Rainbow Cult events. So we actually have a Wicked sing along planned in August. We have let's see, we're gonna do Drop Dead Gorgeous as a July 4th event. With a little weenie roast out front, and looking to do a sing along with probably in November. So
Oh my God, please
fun stuff on the
broadcast that.
horizon. Yeah, a pleasure. I also wrote a burlesque show that is called Arkham Asylum. It's the villains of Batman, Chicago style, put Batman on trial. And that got into Denver Fringe Festival. So that'll be June 4th through the 8th here. My first live production that I wrote. I'm going to stage it.
I'm a massive Batman fan, especially Joel
Perfect.
Schumacher. Who did the Wiz? Who wrote the
Yes,
Wiz?
fat nipples. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Nipple.
So yeah, so it's very queer. My take on Bane is that he was sent to gay conversion camp, and he really wanted to be a drag queen. So when he takes his mask off, it's full glamour makeup underneath, and he sings "This Is Me."
God. Surely Poison Ivy's in there as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. She's an eco-terrorist that got busted for pot and got sent under three strikes rule. So it's a sort of deconstruction of the prison system as well. The opening number is the mass incarceration tango.
Ah, God, I can't wait to see this. This is right
I'll
up
send
my-
you I'll send you the script if you want. I
Oh
think
my
it's
God.
fun.
Thank you. And please come back anytime when we talk about
Yeah,
future cult musicals. I think we've
I love
got
this.
Breakin' in the
Okay.
pipeline.
Okay,
Um,
probably I'd have to go back. I don't think. Wait, is that Electric Boogaloo? Is that the one?
That's a
Am I thinking
sequel.
of the? Oh, okay. Oh, the sequel. Yeah, of course. It's a rare sequel that's better than the original.
Well,
I don't
Grace
know. I haven't
too.
seen it. I haven't seen either one.
But thank you so much.
What do you have? Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you all. Yeah.
Yes. Thank y'all so
Uh,
much for joining.